Welcome to a Rusty Rails Railfanning Adventure Special. On today's Railfanning adventure, we take a look back at all the steam locomotives we've seen in operation, from the oldest to the youngest locomotive. Starting off with Southern Railway number 630, built in 1904. Fun fact that number 630 was used on the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad on the stern gauge portion. And her number on the ET&WNC was 207. As the Norfolk Southern train, the predecessor to the Southern Railway, passes by Southern 630, here's a little history of the locomotive. Number 630 is a 280 consolidation locomotive built in February of 1904 by the American Locomotive Company, or ALCO, Richmond Works of Richmond, Virginia, for the Southern Railway. It was primarily designed to haul freight trains on the Murphy Branch between Asheville and Murphy, North Carolina, until its retirement in 1952. Number 630, along with its sister locomotive, number 722, were sold to the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad and served as switching locomotives. In late 1967, number 630 and her sister were both traded back to the Southern Railroad for use in the steam excursion program in return for a pair of Central Georgia ALCO RS3s. You can now find Southern Railway number 630 at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Unfortunately, she is now down for her 1472-day inspection. The next oldest steam locomotive that we've seen in operation was Shay number 5 at the Cass Railroad, built in 1905. Now here's a little bit more history about Shay number 5. Shay number 5 was built November 11th, 1905, and was delivered to Cass for the original railroad, the West Virginia Spruce and Lumber Company's Greenbrier and Elk River Railroad. Number 5 is the oldest and longest operating Shay at Cass. At 120 years old, the number 5 is the oldest operational Shay in the world, and the official locomotive of West Virginia. The third oldest locomotive that we've seen is Norfolk and Western number 475 at the Strasburg Railroad, built in 1906. Here's a brief history of the Norfolk and Western locomotive number 475. It is a 480 12-wheeler type steam locomotive built in June of 1906 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for the Norfolk and Western Railroad. It was part of the first order of M-class locomotives, number 375 to 499. Retired from the Norfolk and Western in 1959, number 475 was sold to various different owners in Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Iowa until 1991, when it was purchased and restored by the Strasburg Railroad in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where it currently runs on tourist excursion trains in the Pennsylvania Dutch countryside. Fun fact, number 475 is the only 480 locomotive operating in North America, and is the oldest operating locomotive on the Strasburg Railroad. Number 475 is a movie star. It was featured in the 2000 feature-length film, Thomas and the Magic Railroad.
tracks on the bricks behind the cement walkway. Allow passengers to disembark from the train before you attempt to board. Again, for your safety, stand clear of the tracks on the bricks behind the cement walkway. Train number 110, the Susquehanna, departs promptly at 11 a.m. for Paradise.
The next oldest locomotive used in operation was the Reader Railroad number 2 on the Orange Blossom Cannonball, built in 1907. Here is a history of Railroad 2. Number 2 is a 260 local type built by the Dollywood Works in 1907, originally for the Lufkin Land and Lumber Company as their number 2. It is also a movie star. Had gained fame for its use in the 2007 movie There Will Be Blood, along with other films such as 3:10 to Yuma and Appaloosa. The current status of locomotive number 2 is being stored at the Reader Railroad in Arkansas. Our next locomotive is Canadian National number 89 at the Strasburg Railroad, built in 1910. Here is a brief history of Canadian National locomotive number 89. It is a 260 mogul type steam locomotive built in February of 1910 by the Canadian Locomotive Company for the Grand Trunk Railway. Originally numbered 1009, it was renumbered to 911 in 1919. It then came under Canadian national ownership in 1923 when the Grand Trunk merged, and it was renumbered again to its current number of 89 in 1951. Most of 89's early life is a mystery, but it spent the latter part of its life working in Quebec until retirement in 1958, and being stored in the Deadline in Montreal. It was purchased by F. Nelson Blount in 1961 and sent to operate on the Green Mountain Railroad. It was then purchased in 1972 by the Strasburg Railroad, who were looking for an engine to pull half-hour trains. As of 2025, it is in operation at the Strasburg Railroad. Our next locomotive is Southern Railway number 4501, built in 1911. Here's a brief history of Southern Railway number 4501. Number 4501 is a 282 Mikado type locomotive built in October of 1911 by the Baltimore Works of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Number 4501 was the first of its wheel type for the Southern Railway. In July of 1948, the locomotive was retired from revenue service in favor of dieselization. It was subsequently sold to the short line Kentucky and Tennessee Railway, or the K&T, in Skirting, Kentucky, to Paul Cullen Transit. When the K&T was dieselized in 1964, number 4501 was purchased by a railfan by the name of Paul Meerman for $5,000 of his own money, and he brought it to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Shortly thereafter, it was returned to service for mainline excursion service on the Southern Steam Program. As of 2025, the locomotive operates in tourist excursion service at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Our next locomotive will be one of 4 oil burners. The number 4 Roy O. Disney at Walt Disney World, built in 1916. Here is a brief history of locomotive number 4, the Roy O. Disney. This steam locomotive is an American-style steam locomotive with a wheel arrangement of 4/4 and was built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works for the United Railways of the Yucatan in 1916. Originally numbered number 66, it was renumbered to 251 and it was used for bearing both passengers and goods on the Yucatan Junction in Mexico. After serving on the United Railways in Mexico for several decades, it was purchased by the Walt Disney World in 1969 for use in the Magic Kingdom, where it became steam locomotive number 4.
There are some who say that this steam train is a little old-fashioned, but for me,
We have another locomotive built in 1916, the East Broad Top Railroad locomotive number 16. Here's a quick history of the steam locomotive number 16. It is a 282 Mikado type steam engine built in 1916 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for the East Broad Top Railroad in Pennsylvania. It cost the railroad $16,000. After being retired in 1956, it underwent extensive restoration and returned to service on February 1st, 2023. Making it the railroad's primary operating steam locomotive. Our next locomotive that we will see is one of my favorite locomotives. ET&WNC locomotive number 12 at Tweetsie Railroad, built in 1917. Number 12 was built in February of 1917 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works for the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad. After retirement in 1949, the ET&WNC Railroad ceased operations on July 13, 1950. Number 12 is the only one of the railroad's narrow gauge engines still in existence. It would be put into storage for the next 4 years, and it was sold to the Shenandoah Central in 1952. Where it was restored. And in 1953, and continued to operate in service until its second retirement in 1954. Number 12 was put up for sale again, and it was later sold to Tweetsie Railroad, a theme park, in 1957, where it received a full restoration and began pulling excursion trains around the park on July 4, 1957. Today, number 12 continues to operate at Tweetsie Railroad, along with former White Pass Yukon Railroad locomotive number 190. In August of 2024, number 12 was taken out of service to undergo a major overhaul. It was expected to return to service again for the 2025 operating year. However, overhaul work is still underway. The return date for locomotive number 12 to return to the rails is still unknown. Number 12 is also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It was put there in 1992.
Junction Store is part of the Southwestern Barbecue. Maybe you can see some entertaining shows at the pavilion in Oklahoma City. Over to your left is the Hacienda, where we have lots of great special events throughout the season. All the summer surprises. Just by visiting our ticket office. Thanks for riding with us. Y'all come back and ride with us again real soon. Bye now.
Our next locomotive is Shay number 4 at the Cass Scenic Railroad, built in 1922. Here's a brief history of Shay number 4. Shay number 4 was built December 9th, 1922, and was built for the Birch Valley Lumber Company in Nicholas County, West Virginia. The Shay was acquired by the Cass-based Mallard Lumber Company in 1943, and pulled the final log train off Cass Hill in June of 1960. The locomotive was the original road engine for the Cass Scenic Railroad during the inaugural 1963 season. Our next locomotive is a Cass Scenic Railroad locomotive again. Shay number 11, built in 1923. Here's a brief history of Shay number 11. Shay number 11 was built July 14, 1923. The number 11 was bought by the Hutchison Lumber Company's Orville, California mill operation and rostered as their number 3. The locomotive was retired in 1965 and was acquired by the Pacific Southwest Railway Museum in Pampa, California, where she pulled occasional excursions until 1991. Number 11 was acquired by Cass and arrived in 1998, following repairs and entered service in the fall of 1999. Our next locomotive is Great Western Locomotive Number 90 at the Strasburg Railroad, built in 1924. Here's a brief history of number 90. Built in June of 1924 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works for the Great Western Railroad. Number 90 was one of two operational decapods, which are 210 wheel configuration locomotives remaining in North America. After spending 40 years hauling commodities, primarily sugar beets, through the mountains of northern Colorado, she was sold to Strasburg Railroad in 1967 for the grand total of $23,000. As soon as number 90 arrived in Strasburg, over 50 years ago, she instantly became a fan favorite, and remains so even today. Our next two locomotives will be at the Walt Disney World Railroad. Our first one is a locomotive number 1, the Walter E. Disney, built in 1925. The Walter E. Disney was built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works for the United Railways of the Yucatan in 1925. Originally numbered 72, it was renumbered to 274 in 1960. After serving in Mexico for over 4 decades, the locomotive was retired from service. And in 1969, Rodger, a famous Disney Imagineer who headed the Walt Disney World Railroad project, purchased the locomotive along with 3 others. The locomotive was hauled to Tampa, Florida, where it was renumbered to number 1 and put into service at the Walt Disney World Railroad. And to the other locomotive that we've seen at Walt Disney World is Walt Disney World number 3, the Rodger E. Bogey, also built in 1925. Fun fact, number 1 and number 3, their serial numbers on their builder's plates are 1 number different. Originally numbered 275, this locomotive served the Yucatan for several decades ferrying both passengers and goods on the mountainous regions. After its retirement, Rodger the namesake of this locomotive, through his contacts in Mexico, helped acquire the steam locomotive for the Walt Disney World Railroad in 1969. Our next locomotive is Pacific Coast Shay No. 2 at the Cass Scenic Railroad, built in 1928. Here's a brief history of Shay No. 2. Shay No. 2, or Pacific Coast Shay, was constructed in July of 1928 for the Mayo Lumber Company of Halegate, Vancouver Island, British Columbia. The Pacific Coast Shay is a souped-up model of the Class C-70 3-track Shay. The Pacific Coast Shay features superheat, a firebox that is 13 inches longer, a lower gear ratio, a steel cab, cast steel trucks, and a steel girder frame. A feature of the steel girder frame is the large opening exposing the stables. Also, the cylinders were designed so they could be attached only to the locomotive frame, rather to the boiler shell, as in other Shays. This allowed for easier access and maintenance. Number 2 is the only Shay of its kind in the East. Shay No. 2 originally was a wood burner and spent its working commercial life with 4 companies in British Columbia, including the Lake Logging Company, the Cowichan Lake, British Columbia, and Western Forest Industries, Honeymoon Bay, British Columbia. Later, it was converted to burn oil, and then later converted to burn bituminous coal at Cass. Number 2 is the only known Shay to have burned all 3 types of fuel. The locomotive ended its career switching cars on the Vancouver docks in 1970, making it one of the last commercially operated Shays. Our next locomotive is once again at the Casting Railroad, and it's Heisler number 6, built in 1929. Here's a brief history of Heisler number 6. The Meadow River Lumber number 6 was built by the Heisler Locomotive Works in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1929 for the Bostonia Coal and Clay Products Company of New Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The Heisler was sold to the Meadow River Lumber Company in Rainsville, West Virginia in 1939, where it was rostered as number 6. She was retired from the lumber company in 1965 and purchased by the state of West Virginia. The engine ran under its own steam from Renault to its new home in Cass in December of 1966. Number 6 would begin operating on the railroad in 1968. The Heisler is the fastest geared locomotive in the Cass collection. Our next locomotive is Dollywood Express locomotive number 70, Cinderella, built in 1938. Here's a brief history of locomotive number 70. Number 70 was built by the Baltimore Railroad in May of 1938 for the West Pass Yukon Railroad in Skagway, Alaska. It was the first of 4 70 glass locomotives that were constructed for the West Pass of Yukon between 1938 and 1947. In 1963, locomotive number 70 was put into storage after being retired. It would sit for the next 14 years. In 1977, the White Pass and Yukon made the decision to sell off locomotive number 70, along with its sister locomotive, number 71. The Both locomotives would end up in the hands of Silver Dollar City, Tennessee, a theme park in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Initially, both locomotives were kept in storage before 70 would be cosmetically restored and placed outside the train depot. In 1986, Silver Dollar City, Tennessee would become Dollywood, and the decision was made to return locomotive number 70 to operation to supplement their other locomotive, number 192. The engine would begin operation at Dollywood Our next locomotive is Great Smoky Mountains Railroad number 1702, built in 1942. Here's a brief history of number 1702. Number 1702 was built by the Paulding Locomotive Works of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in September 1942 for the U.S. Army Transportation Corps of Engineers during World War II. After the war ended, number 1702 worked on 2 railroads, in Arkansas and one in Nebraska. In late 1991, number 1702 was purchased by the Great Smoky Mountains Railroad in Bryson City, North Carolina, where it hauls tourist train excursions on half of the former Southern Railway Murphy Branch, which spans 53 miles of track between Dillsboro and Nantahala, North Carolina. In 2005, it went out of service due to firebox issues, but was later restored back to operating condition and returned to service in 2016. Number 1702 is currently one of 26 S-160 steam locomotives preserved in the United States and abroad. Our next locomotive is also one of my favorite locomotives. Tweetsie Railroad locomotive number 190, the Yukon Queen, built in 1943. Locomotive number 190 was built in February of 1943 by the Boston Locomotive Works of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for the United States Army Transportation Corps of Engineers. She served up in Alaska on the White Pass and Yukon Railroad to help build the Alcan Military Highway. After the war, the locomotive and a few other engines of its class, numbers 191 through 197, were sold to the White Pass and Yukon Railroad, while numbers 198 through 200 were sold to the Pass Yukon. During the 190's last few years in service on the White Pass, the locomotive was put onto snow plowing until its retirement. In 1960, it was bought by the founder, Grover Robbins Jr., when the need for a second locomotive at the park became clear. It was restored to operating condition by Tweetsie Railroad, and it was nicknamed the Yukon Queen. 1 year later, Robbins also purchased sister locomotive to locomotive number 190, number 192, for his second theme park, Rebel Railroad, which is today modern-day Dollywood. And her sister, locomotive number 192 at Dollywood. Klondike Katy, built in 1943 as well. Number 192 shares much of the same history as her sister locomotive number 190 at Tweetsie Railroad. When the military returned the White Pass and Yukon Railroad to civilian control in the mid-1940s, the locomotive remained with the fleet. She would operate in civilian service on the White Pass and Yukon for about a decade before seeing retirement in the late 1950s. Along the way, she would pick up the nickname Klondike Katy. Her retirement would be short-lived though, as White Pass locomotive number 192 was purchased in 1960 by Grover Robbins Jr., who owned the successful theme park Tweetsie Railroad and wanted to open an additional park. Locomotive number 192 was brought to Tennessee and became part of the Rebel Railroad, which featured a Civil War theme instead of Tweetsie's Wild West theme. Since the locomotive hit the rails in 1961, the park has changed themes and ownership several times, including a brief stint under Art Mondell, who also owned the Cleveland Browns. In 1986, Dolly Parton purchased a partial stake in the property, which happened to be near where the country star was raised. Even as the park saw significant growth over the next few decades, the Dollywood Express remains the crown jewel of the park's 50 rides and attractions. Our next locomotive is Western Maryland Shay number 6 at the Cass Scenic Railroad, built in 1945. Fun fact, Shay number 6 is the largest Shay in operation and in existence. Western Maryland Shay number 6 was built by the Lima Locomotive Works in 1945 for the steep grades of the Chaffee Branch between Chaffee, West Virginia and Bendix, Maryland. The locomotive spent 4 years in active service, hauling coal for the railroad before retirement. The Big Six earns its distinction of being the last and second largest of the 2,767 Shays built. Following retirement, the locomotive was donated to the B&O Railroad Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, where it resided for more than 26 years. A trade arrangement was made with the state of West Virginia for the locomotive in 1980 in exchange for Cass Shay number 1 and a Porter 040T tank engine. It is now time for the youngest locomotive I have seen in operation. Norfolk and Western J-Class 611, the Queen of Steam and the Spirit of Roanoke, built in 1950. 611 was built in May of 1950 at the end of the Norfolk and Western's East End shops in Roanoke, Virginia. It was the last of the 14 streamlined J-Class locomotives. It initially saw service from 1950 to 1959, pulling passenger trains like the Ponton Arrow and the Cavalier at speeds up to 100 miles an hour. It was retired in 1959 and donated to the Virginia Museum of Transportation, formerly the Roanoke Transportation Museum, in 1962. It was restored by Norfolk Southern in 1982 and began excursion service that lasted until 1994. It was restored again and began running excursions in 2015. Number 611 is the only surviving and operational J-Class locomotive. It is the official locomotive of Virginia and a National Historic Mechanical Engineering landmark. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked what you saw. If you did, please give the video a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to be notified about future uploads. Also, join our Discord. Link is down in the description down below, and channel memberships are now active. You can join by the join button or the link in the description down below. And we hope to see you along the rusty rails really soon.